Vayikra is also the new book that we start, the book of Leviticus. This week's Torah reading, Vayikra, begins the third book of the Torah, Leviticus. Last week we completed the reading of the book of Exodus, which concluded with a description of the construction of the tabernacle. This week's portion will provide a description of the various sacrifices, animal, fowl, and meal offerings offered by the priests in this newly constructed sanctuary. When we look at the name, in this case, of the Torah portion, we're actually not only looking at the name of the Torah portion, we're also obviously looking at the name of the book. Throughout the 5 books of Moses, they are called by the name of their first Torah portion. But when we take a look at the English, for example, in this case, Vayikra does not translate anywhere close to Leviticus. Leviticus basically means about the priests or about the Levites. Vayikra means and he called. One has nothing to do with the other. And it's not just in our book, the one that we're starting right now this week, but in fact every one of the 5 books of Moses, the names in the Hebrew do not translate to anything close to the names in the English. Bereshit means in the beginning of. Genesis means creation. Shmot means names. Exodus means leaving. And so on and so forth for every single one of the 5 books. Now, if the names in English were something that only, let's say, other religions used, or maybe were only academic in nature, look, who knows what somebody who isn't basing their study and understanding of Torah in authentic sources can eventually come to. So we wouldn't really care. But the reality, of course, is that the English names are used in authentic chumashim, in Hebrew English chumash, let's say Art Scroll or Chabad, the Gutnik, or the Kehas one. They say in the English Genesis, Exodus, etc. You'll see them on all sorts of different authentic Jewish websites. So how is it exactly that these names are used if they are not proper translations of the Hebrew? The reality is that there are 2 authentic, authoritative sets of names for the 5 books of Moses. One is a more colloquial set. In other words, an easy to remember, what most people use on a day-to-day basis. The name of the first parsha is the name of the book. Very simple. The second set is based on rabbinic literature, monikers that the sages or the commentaries have given to the books. They're not really names as much as they are descriptions. And the English names that we are used to, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc., are translations of those. And so they are absolutely authentic, they're absolutely authoritative. It's just 2 different sets of names. We have a general principle that when there are 2 or more translations, interpretations to the same word or clause or verse or statement from our sages, as long as both or however many there are authentic, have a proper source in something that's actually correct, you obviously can't say one is right and one is wrong. They're both right, or they're all right. And if they are both or all right, that means that they have to somehow interrelate because they are all sourced in the same word or clause or verse. In our case, the fact that the 3rd book of the 5 books of Moses is authentically called Vayikra, which means, and he called out. And it's also authentically called Leviticus, or in the Hebrew, Teras Koyanim, the law or the book of the Levites, of the Kohen, of the priest. Those 2 names are both correct. They therefore have to be interrelated. What in the world is the relationship between calling out and the Levites? The calling out in this case is done by God. God calls out to Moses. That's the very beginning phrase of the whole of the book. The result of God calling out to Moses the result of God calling out to anybody, should be what the Levites are all about. When we take a look at the Levites, they're not just another tribe amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. Levi was, of course, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, but the tribe that he becomes the progenitor of actually has a special term given to it. They are considered the Legion of the King. And we see several very poignant examples of their punctilious adherence to God's commandments, devotion to God's will. For example, the sin of the golden calf. Every single one of the tribes had someone who was either actively or passively participating in that sin. Either doing something or at least not caring that these sins were being done. Except for the tribe of Levi. Not only did they have no one participate actively, they in fact tried to stop it. So they didn't even sin in a passive manner. For that reason, the firstborn, who were originally supposed to be the ones serving in the tabernacle and temple, in replacement or kind of opposite the firstborn of Egypt that were smited by God in the 10th plague, that privilege was taken away from the firstborn of the other tribes and given specifically to the Levites, from whom we have that special subsect, the clan of the Kohen. Why was it given to them? Because they had nothing to do in a passive or active manner in the sin of the golden calf. We also know from the Torah and from the statements of our sages that the Jewish people did not circumcise their 8-day-old boys while they were traveling in the desert because of hygienic concerns and therefore health concerns and even possibly risk of life. The Levites did. Even though they were in the desert, even though logically it might not be the greatest idea, they knew a very simple thing. God wants that on the 8th day a Jewish boy should be circumcised, and when we're doing a mitzvah, nothing wrong or nothing bad is going to happen in that regard. And so, they circumcised. Many other examples along the same lines where they showed an extraordinary level of devotion and therefore are called the Legion of the King. Why is it that they had this level of devotion? Because they heard, as it were, the call of God more than everyone else. And now we understand the interrelationship. The one name for this book is Vayikra, and he called out. Who's the he? God. The other name is Torah Kohanim, the law of the priests, Leviticus. It's all about the Levites. The reason why they are who they are is because of the call. This, of course, is a lesson to all of us, even though you can't become a Levite or a Kohen, but everybody can emulate their level of devotion, their level of dedication, and that, of course, is what we glean from the name of the Torah portion, and by extension, the name of the book.